Hey, everybody, welcome back for another East Oaks Studio episode with East Oaktober, the challenge for the month. Everyone, we're so excited that you've submitted so many beautiful pieces. Today, our lovely guest is Kristen Yan.
Hey,
Yes,
everybody.
she was a East Oaks artist in resident for a little over a year with her and her husband. They came here several years back, and now she lives in Florida and is doing the thing
Doing all
every
the
day,
things.
all day long.
Yes.
So excited. And if y'all don't know Kristen Yan, you got to check her out on Instagram. I'll make sure to put her Instagram handle on the lower thirds of the image so that you can check her stuff out. But I see that we have a couple of people that have joined us. We're going to probably wait for a few more to join us before we get started. So I see Thomas has already said good afternoon from Morro Bay. So hopefully we'll be covering the world with a couple of the people that join us today. So the portrait or the challenge was portrait this week. And that is, I'm so glad to have Kristen on because she is an incredibly good portrait painter in her own right. And so she's going to have fabulous insights to give with us. As always, let us know in case the audio is not working or something seems to be off. Please let us know in the comments. We are paying attention to those. Of course, when Kristen and I start getting like rattling off in conversation every now and again, I'll have to like actually pay attention to what's going on in the
Same.
chat. So,
Yep.
but yeah, we have Newcastle, England coming in. We got from France, got everybody
Pack it
coming in.
crazy.
Well, guys, just like always, we're going to do 10 images that we have picked from the group. And we are so appreciative of all the people who have submitted and have participated in the challenge. Uh, like I had said before, I'm going to be giving away one of the East Oaktober paintings from last year as a drawing for the people who completed all three challenges. Now, just so you know, I'm going to leave it up for another week for you to submit any of the other paintings for a chance at the drawing. And we will be announcing in the week which painting that will be. So looking forward to seeing all your submissions, and that way you get a little bit of extra leeway. We wanted it to be the whole month of October. So without further ado, we're going to go ahead and get started. But as always, we'll try to at least do 10. And with the time that we have, that will, usually kind of go over a little bit more than an hour. And we're going to go from there. But we are going to start with this one. And I will kind of start us off. And then Kristen will follow up with everything. So what a lovely, lovely portrait. This reminds me kind of Lip King's been doing a lot more Western work, and it kind of reminds me of a sort of Lip King background scene, which is really nice. Sort of the contemplative girl. Love this idea, and the composition is quite nice. One of the things that I think kind of works for it is that you have your horizon line coming way up here at the top of the piece. So many people often will put the horizon line right down the middle. And if we didn't have the mountains, that's kind of where that horizon line would be. But because it's up higher, I think that it adds a little bit more interest. So it's really interesting because you have dark on light, and then you've got light on dark, and then you've got dark on dark right there. And you have like light on light right here. So you have like all three different things happening, and that really actually adds a lot of interest to the viewer to see that. So especially in the subject matter. If I were to say on the first thing, what I would feel that would benefit the painting is that you have in this photo, you have this one little area that is not really bushy. And with that, I actually think it gives your eye a chance to breathe. It's a little bit of this like negative space and positive space of the background. So that being said, is if you had that over here in roughly the same area that kind of existed as it kind of comes through over here on the right side and kind of like balances itself on the backside of her, because that way it kind of adds more depth to have the dimension back there. I think that could really help. Now, of course, with that we're talking about value. And honestly, Lip King would be a great person to look at for this, because he does such a great job of painting sort of the desert shrubbery. And there's these like beautiful overlaps of this shrubbery here. And I feel like if that was a little bit darker in here with some of the shrubbery, and you gave them a really understanding of form, but compressed to being in that value range back in the background, I think that could really, really help. The final thing that I think we should talk about, or that I wanted to mention, is this value right here of the background is almost brighter than the value of her face. And one of the things that you've got to watch out for is you want to make sure that the value range in the background is more compressed than the subject matter that you want to bring forward. So by making it as contrasted as the face, it almost flattens the image and brings the background much closer to her, and it reduces the subject matter. So if you look at the value of this versus what's on her face, those two are significantly, significantly different. So, but the darks are even darker too than the background. So notice that this is like adding a little bit of atmosphere, whereas this up here is much, much more dark. So the contrast brings her significantly forward. And you do have that. You have that where the background is a little bit lighter in its relationships. So just keep that in mind as well. What do you think, Kristen?
Wow, that's all really good information. I was learning from that as you were speaking. I love it. I think, first off, I'm obsessed with the artistic license that this artist chose to make the sky different than the reference image.
Oh,
I think
right?
it just adds such a beautiful color harmony to the piece, and I think it makes more sense for these dramatic shadows and things like that, because
Mm.
sometimes when the sun is setting and it's
Yeah, it's got
more of
that
that,
golden
yeah,
hour.
it's got like that golden hour kind of look to it. So I focused a little bit more on the portrait itself. Let me grab my little tool here. I'm learning a new program, so bear with me, y'all. Can you see my mouse on it?
Yeah, you
Okay,
see it
perfect.
great. Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, so draw. Cool. So I wanted to talk a little bit right here about this reflective light that's hitting the back on this figure. So I think the temptation sometimes when we're adding in reflective light is to make it brighter than what we see. It's kind of that simultaneous contrast phenomenon
Mm.
that we're seeing. And while it is bright in the photo, it certainly isn't as bright as it is in this image. And so I think if I were to go back, I would just articulate that a little bit better, because it's sort of glowing a little bit too much.
Mm.
So that area kind of caught my attention. And then another area is this hand here on the left side, especially this area. So this really dark, shadowy transition, it is a strong shadow, but I do think it would benefit from softening this edge a little bit, or at
Mm.
least adding in a transition from that dark, dark into the light. It could even be a transition in temperature, just as we're coming out of this really warm, dark area into the light. And so that might help it look a little less flat and angular,
Yeah.
and give it more of that fleshy nature that we know skin has. And I think that that can translate into a couple other places as well. So up here in this dark area of the eyebrow is another example of where it's coming from a really dark shadow and entering into something that's being hit with a lot of light. And so again, having some sort of softer transition in these areas coming out of that shadow might help it read like it has a little bit more form there
Mm.
as well. So that's kind of what I noticed.
Yeah, I mean, that was all fantastic. I think that to kind of keep going with what you were saying, there's a few other things that I was noticing. Um, is that if this area of the painting, I'll zoom in real quick here. If this area of the painting is just making sure I put up my screen. Sometimes I won't put up the screen and I just realize it. Okay, so if that area of the painting, if we're doing golden hour, it's going to be it's going to be the same feeling of light that this is. Now, of course, this is kind of turning in space, kind of think about it as like a bowl, in space. However, if it is, even if it's turning and is kind of like a less light facing plane, it's still going to have a consistency of value that's very, very similar. And so if I were to change one, I would probably change the value to being more like this one over
Yeah,
here.
agreed.
And then if I wanted it to feel more golden houry, I would probably just warm up this green just a little bit more, give it just a hint more of a, like I would probably push the green to have a little bit more yellow in it, like this, you know, might even do like maybe a touch of orange like this, like something like that. And those color ranges will significantly help the whole piece back here read as a golden hour, but then at the same time allow for the person in the front of the foreground to have more attention. So that's just some thoughts that might help that piece. But as always, we want to help a lot of people, so we're going to keep on moving. But beautiful piece. Thank you so
Yeah,
much for
love it.
submitting that.
Fantastic.
All right. So Shelly Hunter and Jan Simmons. I'm not sure which one is which one's the subject and which one is the artist, but we're gonna go with it. So uh so this, the drawing of this piece is, pretty accurate. Like I definitely can tell that the likeness is
Yeah.
very close, So and there's some things that I'm wondering if you took some artistic license on. For example, as the hair is a
Yeah.
little bit closer to, it doesn't have as much volume. And I would think that that's probably an artistic choice because, it feels more, with it coming out this much further, it feels much more like, for lack of a better word, kind of gives it more of a pyramid composition, and so I think it actually kind of helps that the hair's volume has been reduced a
Agreed.
touch. You
Yeah.
know, something else I want to point out that is nice is that we're definitely thinking about the warm in the darks, cool in the light relationship. And so wanted to just say kudos for giving that a good look. One of the things that I would say is that when you're doing that, you can still keep the richness in the face. Like for example, this whole scene right here is indoors, and so it's under like incandescent light. So it's got a warm light already. And I can tell that we're trying to like shift it to not be as much that. But if that were the case, you can still push the warm and cool relationships, even if the whole painting itself still had warmth. So I could put down here in the shadows, I could put like a little bit of warmth. Let me just pull it down just a little bit of warmth down here in the shadows. Um, and I'm not getting my opacity right. Let's see. There we go. So in here in the shadows, and then in the light, or I can even shift it to having more of like a greenish orange hue, and still accomplish getting the same tones that are in the photo. Not that that's necessary, but just as an idea of something you can accomplish. The other thing that I would like to mention is that we have a little bit of this like light nature of the side of the painting over here. Here, let me just pull this up so we can see it better here. And in a way, this feels like atmospheric light kind of coming in maybe from a room next door. But I don't know if that's intentional, but the reason I'm bringing it up is that the viewer doesn't know if it's intentional or not. And since they're trying to take a guess of whether it is or isn't, um, they're probably going to go, okay, it is. And it's going to influence their subconscious to thinking that this is a warm light coming in to her face. And if that's true and she is this cold, those two things won't mix. They will make it hard for the viewer to figure out what her real skin tone color is. In other words, you should probably think about neutralizing this color almost completely and shifting it more to the cool direction, where it was actually being pushed in a way that was a light that felt influenced, uh, a cool light being influenced, which would then in turn help her face, her face color. So those are like some ideas of what you could do that could shift everything in the painting to feel more like what you've already set the skin tones to be. So those are two things. I'm going to hand it off to Kristen and we can keep on going.
Awesome. Yeah, Jan, great painting. I do agree. Going back to the hair, I think that it makes it more natural. The photo, we have this tendency to want to copy exactly what the photo is telling us, but I think this is a great example of going beyond the photo and taking license to create some angles that are a little bit more interesting. And I think it's done really well here. For me, just simply when I flicked my eyes back and forth, I was focusing a little bit more on the separation between shadow, midtone, and light. And I think that this area under the chin here, on both, I would have grouped a little bit more. Right now, this area under the chin is reading as part of the more light side of the face. And I would have probably batted it down to where it was grouped into more of the shadow side. It is lighter than the shadow on the left. However, I think that separation helps the form read as more round, like the light coming from this direction in the painting and then going into like more of a mid-tone and then ending up in the shadow over there. And this is another instance, I think, too, where reflective light could probably come down as well. So this area in here that's being illuminated by some bouncing light in the room, and also, this area under the chin here, certain instances like that, I think I would come down in value a little bit. And yeah, I think I actually had the same point as Lewis as far as the yellow in the background. I was just thinking of the warm relationship in the photo. Her face is a little bit more warm. And I know, Jan, you had mentioned in the comments that the lighting on the skin in the photo wasn't really translating correctly. So it might be different in real life if I were to be critiquing this painting in real life. But as it stands here, her skin is definitely warmer. And so in your painting, if you wanted to keep her skin as cool as you've made it, I agree with Lewis, sort of neutralizing the light that's coming in from that room, I think would help as well. And then lastly, the thing that I also wanted to comment on was her necklace, actually, because it's such a shiny object against such a dark shirt. I think it would be more interesting if you brought that down in value as well, and then just added a few moments of highlight on certain areas.
Great comment.
Yeah, and I think that would also draw the viewer's attention more to her face and be a little bit more of an understated aspect of the painting that the viewer would have to find rather than go to immediately. So other than that, I think great job. One last comment would be, I know you've articulated here her shoulders in the painting, and I think that just anatomically it might be a little bit narrowed, and I think why it's feeling that way is because in the reference image over here we can't really tell where the shoulder starts and stops, and so maybe darkening this area of the painting in here would help to where it might feel a little bit more natural in that sense. So I hope all of that made sense, but that's my commentary on this one.
Oh, that's great. Also, Jan, just so you know, one thing that can really help is this, the portrait itself is very, very symmetrical. Whenever you take a portrait photo of someone, I know this probably wasn't even a photo you took, but who knows, maybe it was, maybe it wasn't. But anytime that you can, if you want to have their head straight on, switch the shoulders around to where one shoulder's coming towards you and the other one's going away, or have at least some sort of tilt in their head and a twist in their body. And those things are going to help create like a dynamic relationship with the body where it doesn't all feel kind of square. that'll also help with just making a very appealing portrait, you know. So something else just to consider. All right, Kristen, how about you take us off on this next one?
Great. Okay, so we are moving on to this gentleman. Do not see. There we go. Awesome. Is it showing for you? Showing
Yep.
for me? Okay,
Yep.
cool. So I have this one side by side here so that we can see a little bit right off the bat some of the drawing things. So whenever, again, I'm critiquing a painting, the first thing I do is I'm just flicking my eyes back and forth to see what drawing elements jump out first, because the drawing is the foundation of a painting. So before we get into value and color and all those things, we'll just address the drawing. So when I'm flicking my eyes back and forth, a couple things stand out to me. I guess we can start with the nose here. So I think that there is, on this painting, a little bit of narrowing on the nose, and it might not even be a drawing issue in that case. It might be sort of a value issue because this area, I believe, is a little bit too dark than this area in the painting, and a little bit too contrasted from this, white highlight that we have going on here. So what I would do is I probably would group that white in a little bit more with this lighter area in here so that it reads as one plane, and then understate that highlight a little bit better. So basically bat it down in value and make it a little bit less of a stark contrast between these 3 points. So that's one of the things I notice, and that also can translate down here with the nostrils. So we've got this little dark patch here that we can see when I'm looking at the photo. I see how that's bending back in space, but I think having it a little bit dark like that is having the nose pinch in and look like a drawing error. So brightening this value and this value as well and grouping them a little bit closer together will help it look a little bit less bony and narrow. So that was one thing on drawing. And then secondly is this eyebrow area. And again, it could be drawing, could be value, could be both. And so when I'm flicking my eyes back and forth on them, I definitely notice that these two ridges where the eyebrows are creating sort of that furrowed brow, it's a little bit too light. And so that's catching light and making it really stand out and pop. Whereas I think if you were to compress it a little bit more to the shadow area surrounding it, it might read a little bit better as well. And kind of transitioning into the eyebrow here in this area, you can see just how soft in the reference image it is. And again, this is such a hard transition in the painting that I think it's creating, again, that pinching effect because of these values that aren't blending a little bit better. So that was the first thing I noticed. And then just very lastly, I think we have a tendency always with eyes, I do especially, to make the white of the eye super bright. In this case, it's not, glaring white. You don't have it as a highlight value, but I do think it can come down in value to make it a little bit closer to that center of the eye. And that'll help it not look like, for lack of a better word, a sticker. So sometimes when we have the white of the eyes looking so bright, it looks like you almost painted a die and then put it on the form rather than it being part of another shape. So I would just bat that down a little bit in value as well. And same with the one on the left here. So yeah.
Yeah. I mean, all of those are spot on, great comments about the pieces. One of the things I always talk about is like, think of like divots on a golf ball, and the divots that are much closer towards going around into the light. So think about like a single light source on a golf ball, and we're like really close up. The ones that are going to have the most contrast are the ones closest to where the shadow starts, which some people call the terminator line. And then as the divots go up into the light, they get the value relationships get much closer together, and there's less and less and less contrast as they get closer to the light. And so sometimes we have a tendency just in our simultaneous contrast relationships to make them dark. So like what, Kristen was saying about the little points, oops, let me get this fixed there. Okay. So what Kristen was saying, like about the point on the nose and up here on the glabella, which this one is too light and that one is too dark. So it's a few things that's going to actually help this whole thing come softly together. Another one is the contrast in your eyes. We want so badly to make the eye contrast much higher, but in actuality, if we made this much softer in its relationship, we could make the eye have we could still keep the idea of the contrast there, and it would still work a whole heck of a lot better. And then, like you were saying, bring that eye down in space, or down in value. Sometimes I just start talking and I don't know what happens. I lose my train of thought in mid sentence. Okay, so that's one thing that will help. The whole contrast of that eye can be brought up, so that they have more of a closer relationship to each other. So just that alone, helps that eye kind of have a little bit more like he has a lighter iris. Okay, so the next thing I would like to talk about is that compositionally, this part this part of the head being this close to the edge of the canvas really puts a stress on the relationship between all of this negative space on this side to here, to only having this like little bit of negative space on this side. So the next thing I would say is make sure, and this is a challenge at the very beginning when you're blocking in your portrait, to make sure that there's a little bit more of a closer balance. It's okay that it's closer to one side. In fact, often I would say that I would suggest it, but just to make sure that the composition of the piece fits closer to the middle of the painting, something like this will help the relationship of this portrait be more balanced. Because what's going to happen is you have a lip called a rabbit on the front of a frame. When that happens, that lip is going to come over this much, and then all of a sudden you have this tiny little amount of space between the head and the rabbit, and that's just going to feel like it creates extra tension when you don't need it. So I would say the other thing to consider is right in, I think the biggest thing to talk about is the contrast relationships. And so like another one would be in the lips and the light, that you can almost get rid of almost all the dark on this bottom part of the lip, because as it transitions to the skin next to it, it's actually almost disappears. If you were to squint your eyes down, you would notice that these values are very, very, very close together. So that could be very helpful too. The final thing I would say is that, I tend to tell people work with a more neutral toned background. It doesn't have to be totally, you can still be warm, but when it's this yellow, it's going to influence how yellow the rest of your painting is going to be when you first start on the portrait. So I would tone your panels just a little bit more like a lower neutral tone, kind of like, it doesn't have to be that much, but something that feels more like this, because that's going to help influence your portrait in a way. Now, there are people out there that do the opposite, like what they would call the complement color. So some people out there would like actually shift it towards like a greenish color. Believe it or not, that's not green, that's neutral, but because it's like close to all of these things, it feels more blue-green. But you could easily do that, and it's going to help you actually, get your skin tones a lot more accurate too. So that's something to consider as well. But I hope those things were helpful. Oh, I do have one tiny little extra thing to talk about, which is oftentimes when we are working with trying to get a likeness with a portrait, when we're thinking about the eyes, it's sometimes really hard to know how to get that perfect placement of the eyes. One of the things that I want you to consider is actually thinking about, like, when you watch cartoons and you see eyes that are like this, on a person's face, then we almost think that they look sad. They look like they're going sort of bowed down. And if you had people's eyes that were kind of across where there's like more like this, and they, you would think that they're more happy, So like when you're looking at this, he has a much more concentrated look. And if you notice, these parts of his eyes bow up
Mm-hmm.
as they go across. And in yours, they slightly bow down.
Mm-hmm.
They have little bit more of a sadness to them as they go across. So think about that when you're doing it, because that will help you kind of achieve more of a likeness and more of the emotion that the person has on their face. So hopefully that was helpful. All right, how about we move on to our next one? Kristen,
Great.
I'm going to go back to you.
Awesome. So this is our next critique. So again, love the tilt of the head. It's kind of similar to the last one that we critiqued, sort of that gesture there. I think if her face was a little bit more upright, it wouldn't read as well. It kind of has this movement to it that I do appreciate. So on this one, I think light is a really big influence here on just capturing the likeness, capturing the form, everything. And that's just painting in general. But in this particular piece, she's really being blasted on the right side from some light, and that's creating a lot of warmth, a lot of shadows on the left side of the face. When I'm looking at the painting of it, I see that the light is sort of scattered everywhere. There's not really a separation of, stark light on one side fading into her face being in shadow. And that doesn't mean that you have to go super, super dark on your shadow. It's just thinking in terms of shape and grouping. And so for me, I would want to see a more articulated light space on this right side of her. And then a more articulated grouping of darkness on the left. And again, that doesn't have to be super dark. In fact, a lot of the times I like to make my shadows lighter than what I'm seeing in the photograph, because the photograph can contrast and kind of push that darkness too dark. But it would look like in areas like this where we have, again, some reflected light and some of these cooler, lighter patches, I think I would just bat them down and group them in with the shadow, or bring up some of these shadow values as well, sort of meeting in the middle. So bringing up sort of those darker patches to be a little bit lighter, and then bringing those light areas to be a little bit darker to kind of meet in the middle there. And that might help read as if that side of her face is in shadow. And then on this one, even though she does have that tilt to the face, I think we're getting sort of a similar problem as we did in this last photo. So here we have some lines of the eyes kind of going up in this direction, and everything's kind of on this tilt that's like curving upward, where I think with her and her actual portrait, it's more, sorry guys, I'm using like a mouse here, it's really hard, but it's more straight across, and they all follow the same sort of track. And so again, with this one, it's looking a little bit warped in certain instances, in the corners as well. And so I would just kind of make sure that all of your lines, your eye line, your nose line, your mouth line, that they all are in the same linear direction in that way. And then the other thing I would say, and I don't know how far this painting is developed, if this is still a work in progress or if this is finished, but I actually would like to see the green of the shirt in there to kind of break up a lot of this sort of beige skin tone. She's got white hair, she's got lighter skin. And so having, even if it's just 2 strokes or some brushiness down there to indicate a shirt, I think it would also help sort of bring in the tone of the glasses as well.
Echo the glasses for sure.
Exactly. Yeah. And so last note on the glasses is.
Uh-oh. Looks like we lost Kristen. It's okay. We will wait for her to be able to join back. It shouldn't take her too long. So it must have been some sort of glitch on the system. But while she's doing that, I'll go to my critique, and then we'll get her right back on as soon as she can jump back on. So I'm going to just switch over really quick to here, and we'll just wait for her. I'm going to go ahead and go through this while we wait, though. So everything she's saying, spot on. It's great to, the first thing you should do. I'm noticing that there's like a real subtlety to sort of shadow and light, and that's great. But just make sure that when you do so, that that there is a relationship that still exists of separation between where you're going to start the shadow and where you're going to end it. So like right here, this is like where I would be putting in sort of the shadow shape and that was something that she was also talking about. And then from that point, you can still make three-dimensional form happen within the shadow, but you want to make it sure that there's a good distinction, separation from the dark and the light. Even if it's this compressed, where it's this is like the darkest moment of the shadow, that's fine. As long as there's enough separation, and there's just too many instances where like this part of the light is almost in its same relationship as, say, a different part of the light. So hold on just a second. Let's see if we can get uh, Kristen back on. Give me 2 seconds to figure out if she can get back on. All right. So while we're waiting on her, we'll keep on going. So one of the other things I want to talk about is a small drawing issue. The nose for the relationship of the face is a little too much. So hey, thanks for joining us again, Kristen.
I don't know what happened there.
All right. So the drawing of the face is just a little too large for the size of the face. If you're looking at the eyes, you'll notice that like it's the relationship and the distance between everything is a little too much and it's a little too wide. So we can narrow it down, and that will significantly help the proportions of the face get a little bit more accurate. So that's another thing to think about. And also the critique that we did earlier on the other person is watch out for the whites of your eyes. They're getting a little too bright, and it's making her eyes glow in a way that feels like she's got a light in the inside of her head emitting out of it. So you just make sure that you lower that value enough. It needs to at least be somewhere. Whoop, I forgot I have it on high opacity. So somewhere in the range that feels like it's connecting a little bit more to the shadows that it's in. So something that's kind of in that field, even that amount helps make the eye feel much less glowy. And because of that, it's actually going to feel more natural. So those are two things that can really help as well. Um, emotion is so difficult, but what I would say is because the drawing of the eyes are going up too much, we need to bring down the lid a little bit on this side, because in yours, the emotion feels a little more surprised in the eyes, where it feels a little bit more content in the other eyes in the photo. So that's just one other little final small bit of info on that part.
I did
So
want to say one other thing. I don't
yeah.
know if you had said it. My audio went out. My video went out. So if this is a repeat, I'm so sorry. But did you talk about the teeth at all?
No, go ahead.
Okay. So I was just going to say with teeth, I would definitely lean towards darkening the value in the mouth there. I think that, again, with the tendency of photos, we want to contrast a lot of things even further than the photo is doing. And so just my rule of thumb when I'm painting teeth is that I just automatically know to make them darker than I see. And actually in this case, she even has some form on the teeth. So it goes from the light coming in from the right, and then it actually darkens even more in this area, which you kind of started to articulate, but I think it could be pushed even more.
Yeah.
So similar to the eyes, how we make the eyes lighter than we see them, teeth as well. So I would just probably bring the value of the teeth down. So
Yeah, that's excellent. Excellent point is that the value needs to lower, and the contrast. So like, the gaps between the teeth, people tend to make much, much darker than they need to be. So doing those two things will be very, very helpful
Yeah.
for your painting in the future for sure. All right, everyone, we're going to keep on plugging away. So I'm going to switch over to this piece. Lovely little piece. Looks like siblings hanging out together, which is great. And look all this brushwork that we got going on in here. That's so fun
So
to
cool.
when you're painting with paint, it's just fun to actually use the property of paint and like push it around. So kudos for experimenting with some texture and trying to figure some stuff out there. I'm also noticing that the tone on the background was like a dark warm, and then they put the white on top, and that's an interesting combination, because it's going to give like different tones to things. It's going to actually give sort of an intentional chalkiness to the background, which done right can really can work to your benefit, and at least declare intention of what you're truly trying to do. Okay, so a couple of things that I would jump right into on this piece is I'm going to use like let's see, use like a blue
Mm.
color. We'll see if that works well in here. Um, is I'm going to just talk about a few. Oh, that's the wrong one. Hold on. There we go. A few drawing things. So one of them is if we're looking over here, we'll notice that what you're trying to do is get that arc of the nose as it slopes downward. And what happened is that we have the forehead just a little too far forward. So what we really need to do is shift it more in the field of this forehead just a little bit to the right, because we've bowed it too much and it's making her nose feel in a way just a hint off. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to shift the white of the nose over just a little bit, and then I'm going to shift the dark of the nose just over a little bit. And all of a sudden, we still have that sloped feeling that it feels like it's separate from the glabella, but at the same time, it doesn't feel like it's being it feels like her nose. So so that would be one of the things I would say. One of the other things that we need to watch out for is if we're working with skin tone colors, you got to be consistent with your skin tones. So I'm absolutely okay with her being darker than, say, the photo. However, if I'm looking at him, what you'll notice is the skin tone of his face is not the same skin tone as his hand. So we need to bring the value up and neutralize the color that you have in his hand in order for it to be more closely related to his face. So that would be one thing that I would do. And it's kind of, well, it's much easier to do with a digital brush, but it shouldn't take you long. What I would say is just go back to your color of his face and try to match several mixtures, and then go in and shift the color. Now, it makes sense that you would have done that because her skin tone in the photo is a lot closer in relationship than the skin tone of her and him in the painting. And so you were relating his skin tone to hers right next to each other because they are so closely related here. In fact, there's almost some places where it's just almost a lost edge because they're so close in relationships to each other. So that would be one of the things that I would feel would be significant to help the piece, is to redraw the structure of the nose, and then this goes back to the eyes again. Is that the whites of the eyes might be just slightly too bright in hers. They are much brighter than they are normally in some photos because there's more light hitting it, but I will say that you can still bring them down. They're not going to be as bright as like your background pure white. So that's something to consider as well. Kristen, I'm going to let you do it, and then I'll say like a couple more things at the end.
Awesome. Yeah, I'll start by saying some things I really love about this piece. I do love the texture. I think it's really unique. I love how you're pushing and pulling edges, and it has sort of a organic quality to it that I really enjoy. And there's just similar to the one on the last one, how we were talking about teeth. You actually did a great job in this one of not contrasting that, you know, little gap that he has in his teeth too much, or overstating each individual tooth. You sort of came through with a couple strokes, and it reads really well. I love that. So those are awesome things you're doing. I think I'll start with just talking about this arm down here on her. So I think overall, I'm loving, again, like in his hand right here, like you don't need to articulate something so much that it's, you know, rendered out with every single turn
Mhm.
and form if it's this style of painting. And this is an example up here of where you did that really well. I think down here on her arm, some of the edges and different, you know, gestural strokes that you were using with the paint, it's not reading as well. And so right here, sort of where you were pulling the yellow of the shirt down, I think that it's bending the arm in sort of an unnatural way to almost make it look sort of floppy and like it doesn't have
Mhm.
a bone in there. So I think I would want to see a little bit more of a linear structure here, similar to how we can see this line in the photo. It does bend, you know, there is bend to the arm, but I think if I were to paint it in, I would use a little bit more angles to define the bend than I would to just use a, you know, swoop of paint. So I would come in there and find, you know, 2 points, I would even say, where you can create angles in the arm there so it doesn't look so wobbly. And then similarly with the arm, the fingers down here are starting to look a little unnatural as well. And so I would come back in and state some of those linear structures in the fingers too. So this finger, you know, we can see a bend in it. I'd like to see some of that here as well. And, you know, this finger is on the model, and the finger is a little bit bent to where it looks soft and less linear, but I would want to go in and find a point to put some angles in there so it looks less, for lack of a better word, noodly. I don't know how else to say it.
Mm.
You know, sort of like it has no bones in it. So that's sort of some drawing things there. And then this is a fun critique that, you know, take it with a grain of salt. Usually in critiques, we talk a lot about technical things, form and color and value. I want to talk about narrative here. I think the writing on his shirt is hilarious, and it adds to the, you know, cast.
Yeah.
And it
It's
tells a
awesome.
story. It tells a story. You know, right now we see that he has a cast on, but I don't think I would notice that if I were to first glance. Maybe I think it was a long sleeve shirt, just, you know, around his arm. But having that text on the shirt tells sort of a funny story. And so I don't know if that's something you wanted to portray in your painting, but I think it's cute and something to consider moving forward if you wanted to add a little bit of narrative into your work.
Me too, man. I agree with you. That is pretty funny, and you know, would it's funny because we even had one of the Paul even makes that comment too. Says that he thought that was a great logo on the
Mm-hmm.
shirt. So no, totally agree. I'm going to switch it back over really quick. Hold on, just a second. So the final thing that I wanted to talk about is halos.
Mm-hmm.
So halos are usually when we don't take the edges and we don't meet the edges with the other parts of the painting that we paint. And I'm just going to point out, like right over here, there is. Let's just go right here. There's a little bit of a halo
Mm-hmm.
wrapping around the cast, and you can still see like a little bit of a red moment here, you know, a touch of one here. And they're not everywhere, but just pay attention to them because what they do is they separate the space with the person where they end up looking cut out, um, because they have this halo wrapping around it. So what you got to do is you have to paint in a way, you kind of have to paint over. I like to tell people start with the background because then you don't have to worry as much about halos, and you paint a little over the drawing,
Mm-hmm.
and then you paint on top of that, and then you don't have to worry about the halos being a thing. And you also gain a lot of context from the background being the right color to what color you should make the face. So all of this, basically, I would try to like kind of just push it away from the piece, kind of just add a little bit of white in there, and all of a sudden it'll start becoming um, a part of the painting a lot more, and they'll kind of weld themselves together in a way. So, oh, did we lose Kristen again? Let me see. We lost Kristen again. Let's see where she is. There she is.
I'm sorry,
Kristen, what are
y'all.
you
I don't
doing?
know. I don't know what's happening, but if
Love
I
it.
come off, I'll hop back on as quick as I can.
Yeah, no, it's fine. We're good. I think everybody else is gracious and understands. So, um, let's see. We have one thing. Is the single value okay, or should there be some gradation? That's up to you. They do make two different statements.
I
One,
have
if you
a
have the
suggestion.
gradation, it creates space where it's more spatial, but I think it adds more to like more of a contemporary sort of modern feel if you leave the background flat. So it's more about what you're trying to make
Mhm.
as a statement.
Yeah,
Um,
that's
so
exactly what I was going to say too. Is if you did go in and you put the text logo on the shirt, it adds that contemporary flair as well. And it almost reminds me of like a Jeff Hine painting or something.
yep, yep.
So if you don't know who Jeff Hine is, phenomenal painter, definitely look him up. But that could play off, the white of the background popping against the white text on his shirt. So just something to think about. But it depends on what narrative you're trying to tell, what story you're trying to tell.
Yeah, totally. Totally agree. All right, Kristen, we're going to have you go rock with the next one.
Awesome. Okay. So I love this image. I think I've seen it somewhere online. Correct me if I'm wrong, but it just has such a moodiness to it that I really enjoy. And part of that is because of the light play here. Similar to so many paintings that we'll talk about, the light plays such an important role. And so I think what I'm seeing in the reference image is, again, just such a strong contrast between the light facing planes and the shadow. And so I think, again, it's a shape thing. So I would want to see a very defined shadow shape here. Right now, I see a shadow in the painting, but I think if I were to come back in here, I would find the exact shape, almost like I'm an ant crawling along the very edge of that shadow. And I would want to see the same exact shape translated in the painting as well. So, just something to consider there.
Mm.
And then, as on the flip side, as we go into the light, I think I would want to see more grouping of light as well. And so, up here in the cheek area, I think some of this value right here, if I had a color picker tool, I could take some of this value out and compare it to some of these shadows here and midtones. And I think it's a little bit too close. I think I would want to brighten the shadows. Brighten the highlights up in here and make sure that, again, there is a differentiation between this side being in light and then the right side being in shadow. And the biggest place that we can see that needs to be more articulated is in the hair as well. I think I'm seeing just one solid mass and value and color. And so I would want to see, maybe more of a neutral dark over here. And then as it comes into the light, having that warmth show. But right now the warmth is sort of everywhere and there's not a temperature shift anywhere. So temperature and value shift in the hair coming from the shadow into the light. And then just the last thing on sort of a drawing level, I think that this eye it's a little bit too high. It's sort of floating up a little bit. And so if I were to go back in there in the drawing stage, I would not only bring it down, but I would pay attention to these angles of like the lashes and anchor points that are giving me a clear shape of that eye. So right now we see that the eyelash is sort of pointing upward on the painting, and in the photo it's pointing more down. So I think that that would also help bring the eye down without actually having to move it too much. So paying attention to those shapes as well. Sometimes with angles, what I like to do is I think of the hands on a clock. And so I'll ask myself, okay, if this, line was a clock hand, what time would it be? Would it be noon? Would it be 2 o'clock? Would it be 3 o'clock? And that sort of helps me understand which way I need to tip that angle a little bit better. So right now, this hand of the clock is pointing, more towards like the 9 or the 10 on a clock, whereas it should be pointing down here, which would be more of like 8 or 7. So that's just a little trick of the trade that I
Yeah.
like to use.
I mean, that's a really great trick, with that is, you can also just think about what some people say. I think that Kristen's is even better because it allows for you to think of the entire radius or the entire circumference and kind of like where the radius is pointing, which would be like the minute hand or the hour hand. Um, but what a lot of people also say is just if you have a hard time thinking about the angle, apply it to a vertical. So if you have it's easy for us to imagine a vertical and to think about, does something tip this way or is it tipping this way? And if it's closer to horizontal, do the same thing. Go, like you can even put like a horizontal, just a pencil up and make a horizontal line and then go, is it tipping a little bit above the horizontal or is it tipping a little bit below the horizontal? And so even in this situation, that's a perfect way of doing it because on a clock, you've got your noon to 6 and then you've got your 9 to 3. And so like then you can go, oh, is it tipping above the horizontal or should it be, tipping below the horizontal? And so that tip that she's talking about is it's switching below and is pointing more down. So like if the clock was like right here, on the hand, then it would be more towards, like you said, 8-ish. So that's just something to consider that I think is really helpful. Okay, let's talk about frontalization. So frontalization is where if your left side of your brain ends up having an understanding of what it believes to be true of, like, let's just say an eye. Eye is the easiest one to use. So what happens is we think of an eye in our head and we think of an eye sort of like this, it's looking straight at us in front, right? And so like I always think about like the Egyptian hieroglyphics where you might have like the person's face to the side, right? But the eye is looking right at us on like the Egyptian figures. So what happens is that on these figures, our mind wants to bring it more towards the front, and we're doing that right now with the whole face. You're trying to push the face more towards us versus it being much more significantly further away. In its angle. So think about that, and that's where you're getting a little bit of this extra width from. So if you wanted to push it more towards the direction that we want, we need to shave off the inside area of this face, and that's going to help be able to restructure it back. I totally agree with Kristen. We can drop this eye a little bit. And the frontalization is also happening in the lips big time. So we can like push those lips more narrow where this side is, you already have this side significantly shorter. It can go even shorter. So, and then this can be brought in as well. So I think what's happening is there are times where you're focusing on one item separate from another item, separate from another feature. I should call it feature, not item. So, what you need to do is you need to think about where the things line up to features. So, if I did a vertical line from the corner of her mouth to the tear duct of her eye and lined those up, but then also lined up, an angle here to the side corner of her mouth to there. So if I did a side corner of the mouth to here and then lined up this one, which this one seems relatively lined up, you know, I can then make an adjustment to say, okay, well, this angle looks much, much more obtuse than this one does. This one's much more acute. And then you can also connect the other eye by doing the same angle over to this eye. And that's going to give you all these different relationships of where the mouth should be oriented with the eyes, and then the eyes according to themselves. So like yet again, like that line that's going through here versus the line that's going through here, making sure that all of these angles seem to be lining up will really, really help you. So frontalization is also happening right here with this nostril. If you look at it, there's almost no nostril being shown here. There's no bump. It goes just a straight line straight down, versus here we're trying really hard to put out a nostril into it when there's no need to. The viewer will fill in the information that is needed because we're very familiar with the face that is in that 3/4 angle. But kudos to you for making this an attempt. You know, it's actually a very difficult one, a portrait to start with,
Yeah.
but a beautiful one at that.
I have
But
something that I could add to the frontalization that
yes,
might be
of course.
helpful. How I like to think of when I'm painting a portrait, I think of it in two sections. You have the cranium that is like sitting on top, and it's like, think of like an egg or some oblong object. And then you have sort of the mask or muzzle of the face that's all sitting under that cranium. And I actually have a skull, so I can show you. So it's like,
Hold on.
we've got this big oval ellipse, and then look at how all of these features sort of sit under that sphere shape. Now, when it's in the frontal position, it's a circle, a circle, and then everything's sitting under it. And when it's from the side, it's more of that oval. 3/4 is somewhere sort of in between. And so on her, if we go to the reference image, you can see the sort of egg shape that's happening here. It's terribly drawn because I'm using a mouse, but you get the picture. Here's the cranium, and it's always going to kind of rest where those eyes, that eye line is. So we've got her cranium here, and then we have the big mask of the face that's sitting under it. So we have those two shapes. And so here I'm just seeing, we've got sort of the cranial shape, but then we have the mask of the face is almost the same. It's the same, what is the word? Relationship. It's the same ratio. Whereas it should be the cranium should be larger than the mask of the face under there. And so when I'm thinking about portraits in space, that's always what I'm thinking about is usually the anchor point for me is the ear. So where the ear is, the cranium and the mask of the face is that's where it's going to meet. And so that's just, I don't know if that helps when thinking about frontalization, but kind of separating them in my mind between one big shape and another under it is helpful. So.
Yeah, that's awesome. Way to go, Kay. That's good stuff. Good stuff. Y'all are getting valuable information. By the way, I think that Kristen, I know she does mentorships, and I don't know if she has any openings. I mean, she's high demand. But if you ever want any mentorships, please reach out to her because I do think that she does that now for some artists.
Yeah, it's just my name, kristenyan@gmail.com.
There you go.
Email me.
On this next one, I'm going to let you do this next one, and I'm going to put that banner up
Awesome.
while you do it.
Cool.
So.
All right, moving on to this next one. This one is so beautiful in color harmony. I love the colors on this one and how they play together, the pattern, the texture. This reference image is, and I think this one was painted from life.
Yeah, this one was painted from life because we have one. Yeah.
Yeah, the image of it painted from life, which is just
beautifully
done. You. Beautifully done. Super awesome. And you can see even in that image of it from life how the color changes. You can see on this photo, it looks a little bit cooler. In this one, it's a little bit warmer. So I'll keep that in mind when I'm critiquing. But yeah, love the texture on this one. Love the brush work. Again, for me, I don't know why, but the first thing I always think of is just the light and how it's affecting the painting. And so again, with a lot of different paintings that we've seen today, there's not really here an accurate representation of shadow shapes. There are shadows in here, which I love, but the shape of them is running away in the face. So let me change my color to like green so you can see it a little bit better.
Kristen, was that Christian Jan art or just
Nope,
Kristen Jan at Gmail?
kristenyan@gmail.com.
All
Yep,
right, putting it in.
awesome. So this is an example of where you did it really well. This is articulated beautifully, the shape. I think it reads really, really well on the shadow there. But this is what I would want to see more accuracy of, is in the face. So again, hands on the clock. This angle is pointing a little bit towards 11, and this one's pointing a little bit more towards noon. So I would want to go into each of those areas in the shadow and just really find not just angles, but boundaries, and see where it's a distinct shadow and where it goes into more of a midtone. So here's sort of an area in the eye that I think the shape here is reading like this, whereas in the painting, it has more of this kind of shape to it. So, just being more specific with the light and dark, I think that's where we get such a strong likeness from. Even just shadow shapes can read in an instant when you're looking at somebody, and show this is that person. So just paying attention to the shadow shapes there. And I think on this one, what I would like to see is a little bit more of some of this, like these corners of the eyes, and where these lids underneath are warming up. I think you're starting to articulate them there, but it's not reading to me as an eye sitting in a socket. It's just reading to me as shapes. So we just have, an arc here, a circle, and then a shape here. Whereas here, I feel like this is an actual sphere sitting with flesh coming over it. And how to do that is not just by, creating form through value, but also temperature. The red of the eye reading there, and then having some of that red peek out under here, I think would create the illusion that it's the eye sitting in a socket. And yeah, I don't know if you had anything to add on the eyes there, Lewis, but that's kind of what I'm picking up.
Yeah, well, I think that this person definitely understands sort of lost edge, and I
For
think that
sure.
that's being something that's done in the eyes,
Mm-hmm.
especially in the lower part of the eyelid. It can also add a sort of sense of youth to the person's face, where sometimes we will tend to go too heavy-handed with some of our darker tones, and then like age the person more than we really want. So it's like I
Mm-hmm.
always say, err on the side of youth. So that I feel like is something that they're doing very, very well.
Yeah.
The one thing I would say is, of course, this is a slightly different angle than. Oh wait, I should be putting up mine. I'm sitting here talking about mine, and I don't have it up. I feel like the reference image is slightly different angle from the photo taken, so like I can't really speak too much on that, but that the structure of the face is slightly different, where the chin is pushed out a little bit more, and often we talk about making sure that there is a sort of a slope between the head. Like you'll notice that there's the structure, that there's the right bend in the face, whereas the bend in this face kind of doesn't go as far as it needs
Mm-hmm.
to. It needs to have a little bit more either bend at the top so that the structure down here stays more vertical, or we bring everything forward and then bend the bottom where the chin comes to here. So right now it's just slightly too straight as far as the drawing is concerned, and that's a challenge to correct. The easiest way to correct it would be that you would push the hairline over more, and then you would keep the structure of the face where it is, and you would just push the skull back just a hair, and that would allow for the front part to be pushed out just a hint more. But I mean, some of these edges and amounts, there's like some dry brush work done. This person definitely knows
Yeah, love that.
what they're doing and has been doing this a while. You can tell that that exists. The only thing I would say is if you do have something like such a soft lost edge here in the eye, that it should also exist in other places too. For
Mhm.
example, it should live right here in the top of the lips too. Let me make a blue color so we can see it better. So it should also exist up here as well.
Mhm.
And so there's several places where you could find that same passage to hit. But the cool nature that you have on the side of the nose here, it doesn't have to go that far down. You could have it
Mhm.
stop right about here, and then this be sort of part of the color of the face, where also the nostril right here is maybe a little too dark. You could bring that up in value a little bit more, or just bring this to the same value of that. And then that would be fine too, because then that structures the nose properly in space. Um, you know, the main thing I would say is that you do a little bit of unification cleanup with some
Mhm.
of your marks so that the right marks emphasize at best. This feels like a little too hard of an edge right here. You could
Yeah.
clean that up and make that a softer relationship where you're actually pushing the light over into the shadow, where you could maybe do just the opposite, soften this edge a lot, and then push the shadow right here and then like right here, and that will carve out that value that you need and the edge that you need while still keeping it very soft. So
Mhm.
that's something you can do. But I love these cools to these warms to these yellows for red to green,
Yeah.
and I mean, this person definitely knows what they're doing. It's a lovely painting,
Mhm.
and kudos to you on that
I did
one.
want to say one last thing on this one.
Yeah.
I think again, I can't stress this enough. Ears are such an anchor for
Oh,
anatomy.
yes, yes.
And this ear over here, I can see just a clear definition between those angles, and it's coming out. And again, you're painting from life, the model's moving.
Yep.
But if I could just see, more
Yep.
of that right there, I feel like that would add to reading as a head rather than just, a portrait on sort of a cylindrical tube. So ears, very important. So I would just go back in and find that angle and
Yep.
really define it a little bit better.
Totally. Yeah, Gail says the proportion of the shoulders width to the head. Yes,
Mm-hmm.
absolutely. That is definitely off as well.
Mm-hmm.
The head's just slightly too small for the proportion of the shoulders. If you brought them in, that
Yeah.
would significantly help
Mm-hmm.
the right. We don't want it to look like there's like football pads
Right.
on, or that we're back in the 80s with some really tall shoulder pads.
Mm-hmm.
So that would definitely help significantly
Mm-hmm.
with the piece. And just use the height of the head to the width to the pit of the neck, and
Mm-hmm.
you'll notice that you can find a relationship between some part of the height of the head and bring it to the width. Let me bring myself up here. Bring it to the width of the head. Woo! I got to get high here. There we go. Right there. So here to the pit of the neck, and then go across and measure what is actually the width of there from the center point. If you do that, then it's going to help center
Mm-hmm.
your figure correctly, because one shoulder is going to be more foreshortened than another.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Often, if one's coming at you in a certain way or not. So think that as well. Alia says, guys, thank you. This was so helpful. This was a going away gift for my friend.
Ah,
Definitely will use all the helpful comments
mhm.
forward. That's
Lucky
awesome.
friend.
Absolutely. What a lucky friend. That's great. All right, let's go on to, we've got three more left. This is such a sweet painting. I love this painting.
I
So I
love it
can't
too.
remember you. How about you go? I can't remember if I'm going
Sure.
first or you.
This is good. I love this one. I'm a big cat lover, so when I saw the cat in this picture, I'm like, I want this like on a little postcard or something in my studio. So cute. Some things I think you're doing really well. I love how you've grouped the flowers in this big hedge bush back here. I think that the tendency for a lot of painters is to, if you see something that has a lot of scattered light, like, a bush or trees or flowers, you want to just add every single little petal in. And I think grouping them is a lot better and reads better, especially when the flowers or bush is in the background, because we don't want to take too much attention to that. So great job there. I love the just the gesture, the composition of the cat there too. All in all, there's a lot of cool shapes happening in this photo. And the background as well, with the flowers at the top, I think is done really nicely too, back here. It's really hard sometimes when you have such a busy background or like a landscape in the background, because you don't want to overstate or overemphasize the things in the background if the attention's supposed to be on the figures. Or if you have a figure in it and you want the attention to be on the landscape, you don't want to, render out the figure too much to where that's taking away. So I think, this is a good example of sort of blurring some things or grouping them to where your brain knows it's a bush, but it doesn't have every single flower articulated. So if we're moving on to the figures, the cat is something actually that I first wanted to talk about. And it's this sort of light, this rim of light on the bottom of the cat. So if you actually kind of like zoom out and squint your eyes a little bit, I think like when I'm looking up in my monitor, it has the image really small, and I'm flicking my eyes back and forth. It reads as almost, again, like a sticker or a cutout. I think the edge, it creates a sharp edge to where it doesn't look as natural. So I think what I would do is, instead of softening that edge by blending with my brush, I would actually just do that using value. And so what I mean is, whenever I have an edge that needs to be a little bit more soft, I take the value of whatever's next to it. So let's say it's a portrait against a background. I'll take the skin and the background and I'll just meet them in value a little bit more. And that creates more of a soft edge rather than taking my brush and blending it out, which you can do. But I think it's good practice to go ahead and try that with value. So I'd take the value down, especially in this white area of the cat. And I think it would bring the attention a little bit more towards her in the composition, because she's kind of, I would say the story should start here and then kind of come down to the cat, if I were to look at it visually. So in that sense, also, I would want to see a little bit better anatomy here in her face. So it's really hard because it's foreshortened. She's tucking her chin down and looking down at the cat, but you want to see the features of her face. But I'm seeing the line of the face coming in like this, whereas the line on this painting is coming in at sort of that angle. And so it's really a foreshortening issue there. And I think the main thing is this chin shape coming in here would need to come in a little bit like this to bring the face kind of tucked in a little bit more. And then that eye line would come at a little bit more of an angle so that the eyes would follow as well. I know those look like just random green shapes, so I hope it's being communicated well. Maybe Lewis, on yours, you have a better platform where you can show that a little bit better. But those are the main things that I saw. I love the, colors in here. We have some violets and things. I would say last thing just to note is that I think I would either change the temperature, color temperature, or something about this dress here. I don't know if I would take it down or up in value, because I wouldn't want too much attention to be on it. But I think as it stands right now, it's just a little bit too similar to the bushes.
Yeah.
If anything, I might change the temperature of these or add a little bit of white areas in them. But I think it's just matching a little bit too close, and it's not reading as a separate color. So
yeah. You could even just neutralize it to close to white, but still be in the violet range of hue, and it would complement but not feel like it was a continuation of those, because in a way it kind of visually chops her in half with the flowers to the dress. So I agree with you. You could switch it even to have a little bit more yellow white in the light, and that would complement the violet.
Mm-hmm.
So that there are two different ways that
Yeah.
you could change that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so then a few other things that we were talking about, just the opposite of the last one that we saw. We could also, let me just get my brush ready here. Here we go. We could also talk about the head is a little too big for the body. So in the last one, the head was a little too small for the body. This one, the head can be brought down. I would say probably, maybe 5% or 10%, something like that, where um, it's just slightly too large for the piece. And then that would be able to kind of help as well. Ways to problem solve that. You could, there's well, man, there that would be a little tough. You would have to either pull. I'm always thinking about what's the easiest way to like make that happen. I honestly think that reducing parts of the head is going to be the easiest way to make that happen. Especially that gives you the opportunity to change the angle of the head too at the same time. Something that I think could be helpful is I actually love how the form of the cat turns up into the light, and you can see sort of right here a lighter facing plane that also mimics the same lightness that's up on top of the her sweater. So that doesn't necessarily exist much here. It's a little flat in that part. So where this area right here could just go up a little bit in value, and it would make a world of difference. So if we were just to like lighten it up, we would just kind of put a little bit more light in this area, maybe just touch more. And the same would be for the cat. If we had both of those areas that had a little bit of that light happening, it would just give the thing, the both of those forms a little bit more dimension to them. So, so that's just something to consider while you're working on it. Oops. Let's see if I can, my tilt kind of, sometimes I have my touchpad on and it messes things up. Okay, so, but yeah, hopefully that will help as well. Let me just switch this out. There we go. Yeah, and then for the most part, oh, there's also the background. We were talking about the background earlier. I switched this out for 2 seconds where you have a little too much information back here. And so Kristen mentioned that, but just darkening all of that back there, you can see how I just like shifted it a little bit. That will help it still be there, still read a ton of information. Also, I really enjoy the perspective that's in the actual photo. I would love to see that echoed in your painting as well. So like if you notice all of these are diverging lines back here that have a little bit of a tilt. Yes, yet again, just like Kristen, my drawing ability digitally right here
It's
is
hard.
best. So, but these are just a little bit more straight where these actually kind of diverge. So if you went here and looked at the bottom, some of these bottom ones, they go up like this. And then if you look at the top one right here, it kind of goes down like this. Whereas the bottom one here is going straight across or a little bit tilted up. And this one is as well. They're all kind of tilting up the same way. And so what that's telling me is that it's facing us. It's not facing away. So if you did that, I actually feel like it would add just a little bit of dimension to the background. But all in all, there's such strong color in this piece. You really added a whole lot of color.
Yeah.
For that reason, I actually feel like some of the violets can be just neutralized as well, just a hint, because there's so much chroma in the green that you need some place for neutral to be so that your eye rests and focuses on the chroma of the face of the lady.
Yeah. Well, even looking at like that lavender in the background, the bush of white flowers, and then her skirt. Those are three different versions of violet if I'm looking at it. But then in the painting, they're very similar. So I would just, you want to paint everything in relationship to another thing in the painting. So if I were to go back in there, I would just pay attention, is this bush with the white flowers as, purple as the purple flowers in the background, and just kind of gauge which one's more violet, which one's more neutral, which one's lighter, which one's darker. I think that would help it a little bit.
Yeah, and it'll give more focal point when you do
Mm-hmm.
that, So there's lots of things we could do with the chroma, and we could talk about it. Um, you know, uh, Sadly, it's one of those things where I could talk about one of these paintings for like an hour,
Mm-hmm.
but we want to just make sure that everyone has an opportunity to. And since we're getting close to an hour and a half up, we're going to keep on moving to the next one.
All right.
So we have, yep, this is the one. Kristen,
Okay.
you want to take it away, and
Sure, sure.
I'll do the final one first.
Yes. So, all right. Let's just go ahead and start off. I always like to start off with drawing because it's what my eye goes to first. So on this one, let me change my cursor to red. I think what caught my eye at first is just how many round lines I'm seeing. So I'm seeing, we've got this round line coming down like in one swoop there. We've got on her shirt, everything's sort of got this roundness to it. And I don't see a lot of angles being used in any of the forms on the face. And of course, skin is soft, things are going to have roundness to them, especially in a portrait. But in order to really anchor points on a face, we need to have some areas in the portrait that have a little bit more angular straight edges. And so in the nose, for example, instead of having sort of this curve there, what I would like to see is a little bit of a breakup of angles. So I see an angle coming in here, a little bit more of a straight angle there, another one here, and then a straight one there. And so I would just come back in and do the same thing, just finding each of those straight edges and making sure that I don't just take my brush and come in there with one swoop. Now, brushwork's interesting and fun to play with, but if it's if it's not working and showing the anatomy, then I would just say maybe start loose like that, start kind of fun and gestural, and come back in with just a few points to show those angles. And it doesn't need much. That doesn't mean that you need to come back in and actually create a straight line with one mark. It just could mean that you come in and find a few moments to make straighter, to help anchor the nose a little bit better. And then another thing on here is just transition and values. I think the transition in these values is a little bit strong in some areas. And we know that, she is being hit by a lot of light here. And so it's going to create some strong shadows on the left side of the face. But we want to see sort of the light inching into the light that's hitting her. So Lewis mentioned in an earlier critique the golf ball, how if you look at a golf ball, each of those little dots on the ball that's getting closer to the light start to become more compressed in value as they're in the light. And then there's like an exponential rate of drop off as it gets to the Terminator. And that area where it goes from, a lot of light into the Terminator, that little transition is going to be really important in showing form. And so an example of that would be right here on the left side. It goes right now straight from this value into this value. And when I'm looking in the painting, I see a lot of transition in here that happens quick. It does happen quick, but
Yep.
it needs to be articulated, or else it'll just look like, two corners meeting. And so a way to kind of like visualize this, or look at it in a visual way, since we're all artists, is, if I am thinking of a sphere and I'm thinking of the light coming directly from above, and I'm thinking of little light rays shooting down on the object that are all equidistant from each other, as that light ray keeps falling down, this area in between each of these spaces is getting, the light is scattering faster and faster until it drops off at what we call the Terminator, or where there's, no light hitting anymore on the form. And so it's going to happen quick. It'll go from, like, let's say this area right here in the shadow is 100% dark. There's no light in there. Well, this area is maybe going to be, 98%. Or actually, let me try it from the light. So if we're coming here down from the light, it would be easier to say, let's say this is 100% in the light. Then it goes 98% light down to 97. Well, as it starts hitting towards that terminator, it's going to start going quicker. So let's say it goes down then to 80%. Then it goes down from 80% to 60%. And then it jumps to 40%. And so as you can see, it's going from 98, 97 and going quicker and quicker and quicker until it drops completely into the dark. And so that's what we're wanting to see in this edge, is we just want to see an exponential rate of those values turning. So let's say we've got 100% here. It wouldn't be 100%, but just for sake of example, then it goes to 98. Well, right in this area, I want to see it going from that 80, 60, 40. I don't know if that makes any sense, but that's the best way I could describe it. And so that's happening all over this portrait. So it's happening here, in this area down here. We want to see those transitions of shadow peek out into the light quick, but not so quick that it looks like it's going from a corner of a plane to the next corner of a plane. So you probably could articulate that in a better way. So I'll hand the baton to you.
No, I think you said it great. What I would say is if you've ever posterized an image, which you can just get one for your phone, you can just go get like a posterization app. You'll notice that whenever you go, the values, when you separate them to like 10 values or something like that, or let's just say it's 20 values, and you have one value that's on the side of your face that's like in the light, you'll notice that it's a large piece of your face. And then as it starts to get closer to the edge, you'll see that those values like get really, really close together, and they like rapidly go darker and darker really fast. And that's basically kind of saying the same thing you're saying, is that the drop off as it gets close to the edge is significantly higher. So no, that was, said really well. To go back to a few things, one of the things is you're trying to definitely put like a heavy amount of brushwork, which is great, but we got to think about structuring your brushwork. So like what you want to do is you want to like, if you have, for example, this with the sternocleidomastoid, which is that little muscle in your neck right there, you have two of them. You have one on this side and one on this side. And what's happening is you first do a background brush work where you push that brush in. And then when you're doing the next brush stroke, you pull this one over in front of it. So what we did was just the opposite. We did this first, and then we pushed this on top. And what happens is then it makes this feel like it's coming in front of her face. So always think about doing background first, and then you create a little bit of overlap wherever you're doing background, and then you go over with a much broader stroke of the second time in front of that, and then it allows for all of that to live behind it. So that kind of overlap is going to really help your painting feel much more dimensional without even having to do much with even form. So that's something to consider. Also, I totally agree with Kristen with this, the roundness of the face. With the towel on top of the head, I would say there's opportunity for a few more planes to exist where you can like say, okay, here's like one little plane here, but then this is like a broad plane that exists right here. And then maybe this is like a significant little plane that exists here. And you do it in just a few marks, and they can even be brush marks. Each one of those is a brush mark. And then over here, really paying attention. This part should be lighter because it's facing the light. It's going this direction. So it's facing the light because the light is coming down this way towards her face, right? And so it's going to catch the rim light right there on that edge. But then the other part of it is around that dark, And so like making sure that you think about the light every time you're putting something down and how it relates to the perpendicular nature of the form that's around it. That's just going to help you so much. Just like we were saying in one of the other ones, soften the lips when they have on the edge. You want to make sure those brush strokes are really soft. Yet again, the sclera, you want to be a much darker relationship, at least on the side that's the shadow side of the face. So in there, it's a little too bright, gets a little glowy. But overall, it's funny. I still feel like there's a likeness here. So kudos to you for getting that. Also, just keep in mind these corners and these corners should be in parallel to each other.
Mhm.
And then when you're thinking about that, also think about, yet again, like we were saying earlier, these eyes are just the opposite. They look a little bit more alert. They have a little bit more of a bow up. When in actuality, there's a little bit more of a sad relationship in the actual photo. So if we were like to look at this, there's just seems to be like a little bit more of a tilt that goes downward
Mhm.
in their relationship as a whole.
Yeah.
And so doing that will help, this not be, it'll change the emotion a little bit, which is kind of what you want. You want, because the eyes are kind of identified or tied to our identity. And, I know people all the time that say they have like sad puppy dog eyes,
Mhm.
just by nature. So, but overall, great attempt. As far as photos are concerned, don't use one that's so close to the face. This is used with a wide angle lens, probably
Mhm.
maybe your cell phone or something, and it makes the nose much larger than the rest of the face. And so it creates a little bit of this
Mhm.
fisheye effect
Yeah.
where the proportions are slightly out of our natural proportions that we normally see people. Now, if you were
Mhm.
3 inches from their face, they would definitely look that way to you. But most of the time, we're interacting with people around 4 to 5 feet away from their face. So make sure that you're taking the photos around, 4 to 5 feet away from their face, not quite right up on them. That could
Mhm.
also help significantly. All right, let's go to this final one.
All right.
What a cool idea. Like, as far as like a tonal piece and playing with violet. I mean, how many
Mhm.
times have you seen that? I mean, it's not done
It's
that
so
much,
cool. I
you
love it.
know?
Yeah.
Yeah. So kudos for you, because you're working within a very tiny little range of violet
Mhm.
to making all of these warms happen, all of these cools happen. So if I were just to like take an eyedropper to this, you'll notice that my eyedropper doesn't get out of the range of violet. It just stays up and down the same range. I mean, right here, it switches to a little bit more of a cool red, but almost everywhere else, it stays in that sort of warm violet range. So, pretty impressive to still get like sophisticated color
Mhm.
relationships while still being very, very low on like the hue wedge.
Mhm.
So, good job with that. So, a couple of things that I love to tell people about that it kind of surprises them. But if you want to make hair feel very realistic, you got to soften the edges of it. And that sounds counterintuitive. We feel like we should be making edges of hair really, really hard. But in actuality, um, if you want them to feel much more real and much more natural, you first add a softness to the hair in the back. And then on top of that, you might do just a few tiny, tiny little spindlets
Mhm.
that interact with the hair to make it feel like there's like separate little follicles. But just by doing this a little bit, it helps her hair have a bit more of a natural relationship, and it doesn't feel sort of sticker cut out,
Mhm.
which is something that Kristen and I both have kind of said a couple of times on this. So if you're wondering what we mean there, it just means that if you the edge work, if it stays soft, it's going to feel less stickery.
Mhm.
So, so just keep that in mind. That's one of the things that I wanted to go through. Also, like the brushwork up here, yet again, we can make it super soft up here, and that would help the whole thing kind of disappear
Mhm.
focus. We don't want our eye wants to focus on things that are sharp. So whenever you're working in stuff like the background, you just want to soften it where you still feel like we talk about it being soft but specific. That's like one of our sayings here. You want it to still feel like it is a structured edge, for example,
Mhm.
but you want it done in such a way that still is so soft that your eye is not drawn to it. So that's something to consider when you're working on it. Just remember, soft but specific. That really helps. Yet again, wings, that would be great because then it kind of creates a depth of field in your work. And so it'll create a little bit of this like subtlety that you notice them back there, but at the same time, your eye's not focusing on it. Your eye's going to what is sharp on the front of the face. So lots of room for soft edges in this painting. Kristen, what you got for me?
So the first thing I'm going to comment on are the eyes. I think that the white highlights in the eyes are just too bright. And in fact, if I'm looking at the reference image, they have blue in them, actually, the light that's in them. And so I think I would not just go down in value on these white areas, but I would also change it from pure white to maybe having some of that blue in there. And that to me makes it look less cartoony. And another thing that maybe is coming across a little bit cartoonish is the size and boundaries of the eyes. So underneath this part of the eye, we see that there is a dark line here in the painting, whereas in this reference image, it's a lot more soft, a lot more subtle, and lighter. And so I probably would just go in there and soften and lighten that. And then on top of the eye, it's very hard to see in this image, but this is where you have to kind of think conceptually. If it's a sphere, and it's hooded by a lid, you want to make sure that you're transitioning. It's not just one value in the whole, wide of the eye. You want it to have some form to it. So going from, maybe where this lid is a little slightly bit darker into maybe a little bit lighter as it comes around the form and peeks into the light. And right now it's kind of doing the opposite, where it's darker here and then coming light and then getting a little bit dark. So that might help as well. And then the shape of the, brown of the eye, we had mentioned in a previous critique, just softening that edge from where the brown is to the white. Even if in this photo it looks like it's super stark contrast, trust me, soften it and it's going to read a lot more naturally. Like I said, with the teeth, the white of the eyes, those are just a few tricks of the trade that no matter what the photo is telling me, I'm always going to make it darker than I'm, perceiving it, and a little bit softer. And it'll help that naturalism a little bit more. And then my only other comment was this object in the background. I don't really think, if anything, if you want to include it, I think it needs to be way more soft in its transition from the background into the object, a little bit more, I guess, ambiguous. And right now it's looking like it wants to be something and it wants to read as something, but we don't know what. And so either, soften it to where our brain knows, okay, that's just a background object that I don't need to pay attention to, or articulate it in a way that you can tell what it is, but doesn't take away from the portrait. So those were two kind of things I saw with this one. But other than that, it's really great. I love, like Lewis said, the violets in it. That was the thing that really struck me. I think you did a really great job right here in transition from like a dark shadow into coming up into the light. So there's a lot of good things in this painting that I enjoy, but just some edge things, this area of the wing being so stark of an edge might need to, either come down in value in this light patch so that it reads as a softer edge, or actually soften that edge. But overall, very well done.
Well, y'all, that's it. I know that there's some that we didn't get to. There's plenty there. We had quite a few entries like we have every week. And so sadly, we can only do 10 at a time. But I just wanted to say that it has been such a joy doing this with y'all. When we will be giving away one of my demo paintings from the East Oaktober of last year. So all you have to do is make sure to submit to us all three of your images that you painted for the still life, the master copy, and the portrait. And we will then submit you for the drawing at the end of the month. We will do it on YouTube. We'll do it live, but we also are going to embed it into our email blast for our newsletter every month. So it will be embedded as there as well. And we will also reach out to the person and send them an email that won, if we do have your email. Make sure to sign up for our email list. Just join, go to eastoakstudio.com, and you can join that if you haven't already. Usually we also have links in our YouTube description as well. And so once you've submitted that, then you'll be it will be available to actually reach out to you. So yet again, everyone, I hope that this has been an enjoyable time. Thank you so much, Kristen, for joining us
It's
today.
been fun.
It
Yeah,
was
thanks, guys.
such a blast, and y'all have been such a great audience, and we look forward to doing this again. We're planning on doing more challenges. We might even try to do one biannually, and if we find that we're able to have the capacity, maybe even do them quarterly. So look forward to talking with y'all again and continuing to interact. So thank you yet again, and for I don't have anything else left to say. Do you have
Happy
anything else
painting,
left?
everybody.
Happy painting. Y'all have a great day.